Our Real Mysteries team recently discovered the poignant sermon notes that were originally presented on Sunday, April 23, 1995, as help in transforming our trauma. In response to the tragic destruction that occurred in Oklahoma City just 4 days previously, these notes offered specific steps in dealing with the why question and emotional issues such as fear and anger. These words of consolation and encouragement found their way into many people's lives, including President Bill Clinton. So we contacted Dr. Michael Anderson, who composed the notes and delivered the message for the inside story. Dr. Michael Anderson arrived in September of 1977 as only the second person to lead Westminster Presbyterian Church as its senior minister. And we are fortunate enough to have Dr. Anderson with us this morning. And I've just got to jump in here and say, I've been reading through the notes. We have your notes of this sermon that you gave to your congregation the following Sunday, which was April 23rd, 1995, after the bombing. And we're going to talk about that here in just a few minutes. But I just wanted to let you know that it's so touching. And even years later, as I read through this, it's just so poignant. Can you share with us where you were on April 19th at 9:02 a.m. of 1995?
One of those moments in life that one would never forget. I was, ironically, touching my car door to open it at Westminster Church on my way to St. Anthony's Hospital. I was going to be visiting some of Westminster members who were hospitalized, and heard this bomb sound. We didn't know what it was. And immediately, it was so huge. You could feel buildings move and shake around us, even at Northwest 44th Street. I was at the corner of Northwest 44th and Chartel, and right at the corner of Westminster Church. And immediately turned on the news, and it was announced that a gas line or something had blown up. And I was headed to St. Anthony's anyhow. By the time I pulled out on the road at Chartel, moved towards the city, you could see the black smoke in the sky. And I thought, this is not a gas line. And it was only minutes later they realized that a second explosion and the disaster was taking place. And so then I went right on to St. Anthony's, and by the time I got there, the triage was already starting. People coming from that bombing just blocks away, someone being carried in the arms of others, running to the ER at St. Anthony's, and the chaplain was there and asked if I'd start visiting with some of these people coming in, but it was already crowded in the hallways. And an amazing event of Oklahoma's response to the bombing was already being enacted right then, moments later.
As a pastor, and I know this as well, but you are very aware that there is evil in this world. But at that moment, when you were at St. Anthony Hospital and you saw the people being brought in and that devastation, was it hard for you to understand the depth of the evil of what had just happened?
We didn't at that time know much about the circumstances, almost nothing. It was sometime later we began to put the pieces together, how well planned this evil act was. But when you come upon the scene of any tragedy like this, the first response is the suffering of the people right there. And the visibility of that was overwhelming. We had some attendants at the hospital actually fainting from the sight, but by and large, it was an amazing thing to watch how the doctors and the staff coordinated, and not just doctors from St. Anthony's. They had an alert system already in place long before the bombing, where doctors all over the greater Oklahoma City area and the entire county and even beyond would be called to an emergency via, in those days, their page. And they were coming in, and it was organized so that you didn't have all the neurologists, neurosurgeons at one hospital and only cardiologists and cardiovascular surgeons at another. They had it organized in such a way that triage could be spread around the immediate hospitals closest at hand. All of that was in place, that organization of the medical staff from many, many different medical systems, so well. It was really amazing how quickly they responded. And so then you start just moving among the people where you can be of help, just listening to the heartache and the pain of those who are waiting now to see if this loved one will survive.
What was it like then in preparing for that sermon to your congregation, just a very few days later after the bombing?
Yes, a sermon had been prepared already that week for the Sunday, and of course it had to be changed. On Saturday night, fairly late, I was looking at the sermon. I said, I'm going to do something entirely different. By that time, I'd already spent 3 days and nights visiting with people directly involved around the bombing and who were related to the greater Westminster church community. Numerous of them members of the church, others friends of members of the church. And so I needed to have something ready that was more specific to the moment. And it was fairly late at night, and I need to thank very much Marcia Swift. She came up with a handout that I'd prepared in my own inimitable handwriting, and it was written on not church stationery, but my personal stationery, and it's like 6 pages of this handwriting that became the outline of the message that Sunday. And I had not seen that since the moment it was handed out. Now, I finished writing this close to midnight. I took it to Kinko's. They put together a packet of nearly 2,000 of these writings, stapled them together, and handed them out. So this was a handout with the church bulletin at all 3 services of worship that took place every Sunday at Westminster. And the place was, of course, all 3 were very busy services. Mm-hmm. The audience was packed out the sanctuary with people waiting to see what would be the church's response. And so I have that in front of me at this moment, and I had not seen this until you and your organization and Marcia Swift made this available to me.
And we have it on the website, and I would love for people to go there and take a look at it.
It amazed me that you had it. I did not have a copy of this. I checked my files. I found the sermon I didn't preach in the files. I didn't find this.
Wow.
I've not seen it until the moment I was called this week.
How did that make you feel when you read through this?
Well, when I read it, then it brought back these memories of what I'd actually done at Kinko's. The reason I went to Kinko's, my secretary didn't want to wake her up, and it didn't get typed out. It's not that I can't type. I was in a hurry, and I knew Kinko's was still open, and I got there in time for them to throw it together. And I thought, well, it probably is just as well to hand out something that's handwritten anyhow because of the special occasion that we had at hand.
Would you mind reading for us that the first page, the letter?
Yes, this would be just the beginning. This was Sunday the 23rd, 1995. Dear friends in Christ, April 19th, 1995 will go down in infamy. It will also mark a transforming moment, for God's sovereign love and grace is the only power that is greater than the ignoble darkness that prevails in the human soul, that creates the vicious wrong experienced by innocent people. We shall overcome the horrific dimensions of hate revealed in the intentional planned destruction and the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City. The stunning blast of vicious rage that tore apart our dreams, our babies, our loved ones, shall not end in the nightmarish conclusion of our community. Christ will lead us forward along the ambiguous labyrinth way.
That's beautiful. Could you give us some of the details of what came next in your sermon?
Well, briefly, it was a 12-step program, not an AA 12-step, but 12 steps related to help in transforming human trauma. And I used as the first step the Serenity Prayer and gave the people a copy of it with these notes. And it was to be read both as individuals, couples, families, each day, for as many days as they wished. And they could read with that Romans chapter 8, verse 28 and following, if God is for us, who can be against us? We're more than conquerors through him who loved us. And step 2 gave them suggestions. There are some ways to help the children who are traumatized or troubled, and many, many children are. And one is to let them express their feelings in words, in art, drawings. Let them know that fear and emotions, such as being mad, sad, or had, these are natural. Do not criticize anyone for feelings or make light of tears or pains, like terrible words like, oh, get over it. And let them pray and spend time with each child. It's important. If you have 3 children, make sure each gets a private time with a parent to talk about. And let them know that security and safety is something we all need. And their desire for this is good. And answer simply, but not elaborately, all their questions about the tragedy of April 19th. A third step was good for both adult and children, and that is, each of us needs sometimes assistance in forming words to express our inner feelings. Mm-hmm. But we feel that words are really vehicles. The right word is a raft.
And that helped.
Yes.
That helped me as well.
If you're in a sea of meaningless, Nietzsche said the right word is your raft of hope and salvation. Fourth step is to take seriously anger. And anger is not evil. The Bible actually says be angry. Just don't let the sun go down on your wrath, meaning don't hold your wrath and your anger for long periods of time. Let it out in a creative way. Express it nonviolently, and let it go. But don't hide it. And get free from the controlling emotions that overtake life, such as anger. And 5, pray a prayer like Psalm 62, very simple prayer. The Psalm says, leave it all quietly to God, my soul, my rescue. It comes from him alone. And step 6, read Psalm 46. You could do this on a daily basis and conclude that reading, that psalm that says, God is my strength and refuge, a present help in time of trouble, with a prayer such as John Donne's prayer. And this is something children and parents can pray together. And it's the beautiful John Donne prayer was given to each of the members.
Could you read that for those of us who don't know it?
Yes, bring us, O Lord, at our last awakening into the house and the gate of heaven, to enter into that gate and dwell in that house, where there shall be no darkness nor dazzling, but one light, no noise or silence, but one equal possession, no ends or beginnings, but one equal eternity, in the habitations of thy mystery and thy glory, world without end.
Okay.
Amen.
Thank you.
And the seventh step of this 12-step program, God does not cause evil to happen. This is God is not the cause.
Okay, that's a big one.
It's a big one.
That
and
is
it's
a
one of the
huge
first ones
one.
ever raised, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is. It
Why did this
absolutely is.
happen? Did God do this? And the answer is no, no, and no. Read Luke. I always like to go to the Word of Christ when you have a theological question. There are many other sources in the Bible, but the primary source for a Christian is Christ, and He is the great teacher, and He is the Lord who understands the heart of God. And He told a story in Luke 13 that it has two tragedies in it, one caused by humankind and the other caused by nature. And in both of them, He said, did God do this and these people were sinful, therefore it happened to them? And the answer is called out, no, no. This is not God's doing. You live in a world of this ambiguity, and you live in a world of natural causes in which very difficult things happen. Timothy McVeigh caused this, not God.
You have in here on your notes, it says, especially explain this to children. How does somebody explain that to a child?
Okay, a child will understand that the older you get, the more you learn about how complicated bad things are with people. Every child knows there can be a bad kid around. But what happens when this accelerates over a period of decades? And adults know a lot more about evil than children. But it helps them to realize that these bad things that happen that come from evil people are not caused by the divine being whose grace oversees all of us, but it is the conclusion of sometimes many people working together on a very bad idea, such as World War II and Nazism and the dictatorships that had to be overthrown in that war, and children understand that. And they will understand more and more as they're allowed to think about it, about just events that they're aware of. And then there is, in step 8, something that is probably the hardest thing to do, and that is surrendering to the higher will of God's love. And we gave them a prayer that they could follow from Charles Foucault, who is a beautiful prayer of a person who lived out in life the meaning of his prayers. And it is stating that into your hands I commend my soul and offer to you with all my love of my heart, for I love you, Lord, and so need to give myself, to surrender myself into your hands without reserve, with the boundless confidence that you are my Father. And a child can pray that and begin to think about what it means to give one's own fears and life to God. The 9th step is to let the children think with you and others that as a Christian, we know God revealed in Christ is God who meets us in our human tragedy. Christ didn't live a life that was unmolested by human tragedies as great as this Oklahoma City bombing is. Jesus experienced human tragedy firsthand in his own crucifixion, the suffering and the death of that Passion Week. That is God joining humanity in its own sorrow. And so we meditate upon the words of Christ when he shouted out his needs from the cross. And we see those words written, by the way, as Jesus from the cross is actually quoting Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? But that psalm continues, Psalm 23. However, you, Lord, are my shepherd. I shall not want. And so we suggest another prayer. It comes from the ancient Gaelic prayers that people can pray. And in step 10, very important in times of sorrow and tragedy like this that we learn to help others by letting them tell their story. And children can do this with other children in groups, at family settings, in their churches and synagogues, temples where they worship, in their schools. Let them talk and hear the experience of what they're feeling with others.
In a safe place. And
It really helps.
and one thing you mentioned earlier was the drawing. And when a
Yes.
child draws, that
It-
automatically brings something out in them where they feel
Excellent.
like talking, right?
We sometimes forget the power of art. And when we go to the Oklahoma Memorial now, we see that power. And step 11 of the 12-step program these people got that day, accept reality, not illusion. I think a lot of us sometimes get caught up in the illusions around our lives. But this is real. And it helps just to say, I will accept this reality. And we gave a prayer from a Confederate soldier, a soldier whose prayer was passed on after the Civil War. And it is a prayer in which the reality of his own difficult life and death are recognized, but in the context of giving his life over to both the love of his family, his wife, and to the love of God, and ultimately to the eternity of God's love. And he concludes his prayer, having gone through this suffering and knowing that he is dying. He says of himself, almost despite my unspoken prayers, they were all answered, and I, among all persons, am most richly blessed. And that is an amazing miracle to see how in this midst of suffering, there are still blessings that come. And that leads us to the 12th step, and that is the ways we find to give of our time, resources to others, because God meets us in this act of giving. Christ is in the human needs that are expressed about us, and we meet Christ there when we respond to those needs. So we let children give, and children gave generously in this. Children all over this state, throughout the world, were willing to support people who are in need of various needs during this terrible occasion.
And until this happened to me personally, the giving during your own need, I didn't realize how powerful that was.
Yeah, isn't that something?
Yeah, it really is. And to find out how God can bless you during that time is pretty amazing. And I truly never really grasped that until recently.
And we concluded with a prayer we gave to the people that they could use themselves with their families, and it comes from Martin Israel, who himself is an interesting character, suffered a lot, died with Parkinson's disease, but he started out as a very famous ophthalmologist in South Africa, a white South African who grew up in a home that had many black South African servants. It is a home, it is a Jewish home. He learned his Christian faith from those black South African servants. He went off to his medical awards and so on, and eventually ended up becoming an Anglican priest. And at the same time was a famous pathologist and headed up some very important research studies in pathology. But he was a great writer, and he left us this prayer: let the healing grace of your love, O Lord, so transform us that we may play our part in the transfiguration of the world. From a place of suffering, death, and corruption to a realm of infinite light, joy, and love. And with that, we handed these notes over to people, and life continued on with everybody in so many amazing stories that were told by literally hundreds and thousands of people connected with those who suffered this terrible tragedy.
Dr. Anderson, I heard you speaking earlier when you arrived that President Clinton somehow got a hold of these notes and wrote you a handwritten letter from Air Force One. Is that what you said?
Yes, it was. Thanks to my good friend, our good friend, everybody knows Mike Turpin. A great, great guy, member of the church. And Bill Clinton, the president, came to town. He responded. He has a great be here again on the 20th anniversary. And he was going through his own personal trials, literally, as hearings were going on between his situation as president and the U.S. Congress. And Mike handed him a sermon from me. And he says, Bill, because he knows him real well, you got to read this. And he was just getting on Air Force One to say goodbye, didn't even have a chance to throw it away because it was handed to him just before the door closed. Mike said goodbye to him, shook his hand, and he evidently read it because he wrote a handwritten letter in his own left-handed handwriting on Air Force One stationery. And I got it a day and a half later. And Mike had already told me that the president might be reading your sermon.
Wow.
But anyhow, he made comments on it, and I have that little letter from the President Clinton. So whether or any of the members of the church actually read these notes, I don't know. Certainly Marcia Swift must have, because she had them 20 years later. We know also the President of the United States and Marcia read these notes.
And now I have, and
you have too. Thank you.
And hopefully many others will visit the website to read these, because no matter, and I know we're talking about the bombing and the anniversary today, but no matter what their situation, going through pain, it's very helpful.
Yes.
So thank you for bringing those.
Well, thank you, and thank Marcia.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Marcia. We've titled our documentary, We Will Always Remember, on the 20th anniversary of the federal building bombing here in Oklahoma City. And we want to honor all those innocent people whose lives were lost from this very evil act. So, Dr. Anderson, what do you want people to remember today?
First and foremost, that evil can be overcome with good. Secondly, evil acts in life are not caused by a divine being. They are the actions of the misalignment in our own human heart, soul, and community. And we can overcome those tragedies when we are willing to be transformed by the one who gives us forgiving, divine love. And we see that in the person of Jesus Christ.
In reflecting back over the many years that you've lived here in Oklahoma City and through this tragedy, is there anything else you'd like to share that we haven't touched on?
Oh, yes. I'd like to share something that relates specifically to the bombing. And at Westminster Church, for each Sunday for a number of weeks after the bombing, we had the National Firemen's Crew, that was a national group drawn from fire departments across the entire country, came here and worked because they were a crises team that were trained of how to respond to tragedies. And there were members in that group that had already been in the bombing at the Trade Center, not the 2001, but remember, in 1993, the Trade Center in New York City was bombed. Mm-hmm. The bombs went off in the parking and so on, and they had to evacuate the buildings, and it was really a disaster. And that, too, was caused by the Arab terrorists, Muslim terrorists that were anti-American and responding to what they said was American interventions in the Middle East. So we had the same firemen that were there in New York City, here in Oklahoma City, and these firemen came from across the country. Now, the captain of the group was from California, and I knew the town in California well, and I had moved here to OKC from NYC, New York City, and he said something to me I'll never forget. He said, the difference between Oklahomans and New Yorkers and responding to tragedy is like two different worlds.
Really?
And I said, well, give me an example. He says, well, it's real easy examples. I'll give you dozens of them. But you have a community that actually responds and loves each other. You can see it in the people. For example, we'd be working, we'd step out on the street, and in Oklahoma City, they would be giving us meals, beautifully prepared meals, barbecues, all set up there, and anything we wanted. And then they hand us a ticket to 2 or 3 different restaurants where it's paid for to go to get your evening meals, your breakfast. Hotel rooms were offered to us. He said, the difference in New York City, we step out, get something to eat after we've been working in this fire site, and somebody sells us a sandwich. And the prices were going up every day.
Wow.
And he said, we didn't have a community of country folks giving us free meals and so on everywhere we turned around. He said that was the difference in 1995 and I believe it was 93 in New York City. But that is a reflection of the quality difference of, we're Midwestern here, a lot of country values. In Oklahoma City, I grew up on a ranch in Washington State. Oklahoma City to me has always been like a big farm town. It's very friendly, you know everybody, and compared to the big congested cities of the coast, particularly the East Coast, people here can look in the eye and talk to you on the street whether they know you or not. You, within a few moments, will have a friend, It doesn't work that way necessarily on the Eastern Seaboard.
Well, we're glad you liked it here and stayed, that's for sure. Because you were telling me you were planning on moving away.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd stay here long. I grew up on the West Coast and had this various experiences in Britain, New York City, and so on. I thought I'd probably end up back in California.
Well, Dr. Anderson, thank you so much for your time.
It's great to be here.
For the interview this morning, and just have a blessed day.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Real Mysteries is sponsored in part by Roadrunner Press and is produced in Oklahoma by Oklahomans. For more information, visit our website at realmysteries.us. And as always, we encourage you to visit the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum, either in person or at their website, oklahomacitynationalmemorial.org.